All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Torah Studies. And I'm telling you tonight, wherever you are, if you're here, if you're somewhere else, you are in the right place at the right time, because tonight's class is one of the most brilliant Rashi insights that I have encountered. And I am so happy and so looking forward to sharing this with you. So tonight's class is on the Torah portion of Chayei Sarah, as you know, because that is this week's Torah portion. Tonight, we're going to dedicate the learning to a dear friend of many of ours, I'm going to say all of ours, Norm Gray. Norm Gray last night fell and broke 3 ribs. Yeah, and the information that I got is that he's doing well under the circumstances, but certainly he needs a refuah shlema, a full and speedy recovery, and blessings for that. And so indeed, we are going to dedicate tonight's learning for the merit of, hello. We got confirmation, by the way. So in the merit of the learning, in the merit of the refuah shlema, the healing for Nehemiah ben Fagel Gittel, indeed Norm Gray should have a refuah shlema. Anyone who knows him knows how special he is and how dear he is to all of us. He's a guy that's full of life and full of energy. And for those that don't know him, he was the founder and creator of the Creative Circus, which was a local, what would you call it? A school, university, academy, a school for creatives, artist design. Absolutely, he founded the Creative Circus, and he taught advertising, marketing. He taught, I don't know, thousands of people, and really brought them into the field of creative advertising, marketing. An incredible guy, the most humble man you'd ever meet. You would never know about his accomplishments otherwise. A fellow who came back to his Jewish roots late in life. He was not a guy that went to shul for many, many years. I would say many decades, and later on in life, kind of got re-inspired with his Jewishness, and is indeed an inspiration to so many people. And so tonight's class is dedicated to his refuah shlema. He should be strong, he should be well, and it should be very quick, and his healing should go smooth. Let us say amen. All right, so this week's Torah portion is Chayei Sarah. And I just want to do a quick overview, very quick here. Take this one. Very quick overview of the Torah portion. Can I grab another copy, please, of the Chumash? Yeah, thank you, Ross. The Torah portion begins by discussing the passing of Sarah, our matriarch Sarah. Torah tells us she passed away at the age of 127. Abraham, then is involved in her burial and her passing. And right thereafter, Abraham says it's time to himself. He says it's time to marry off my son, right? A very Jewish, maybe not only Jewish, but a very Jewish thing as well. It's time to marry off my son, says Avram. He's of age, and we need to find him a spouse. The bulk of the Torah portion tells the story of how Abraham sends his trusted servant Eliezer back home to his old hometown of Haran to find a wife, and how he finds this woman, and how by divine providence, exactly the sign and the deal that he makes with God comes true. And indeed, it's the right girl. And then she follows Eliezer back home to where Abraham and Isaac and Yitzchak live, and they get married, and they live happily ever after, or at least until next week's Torah portion. Tonight, we're going to start by reading chapter 2, I want to say 24. Yes, chapter 24. Mm-hmm. Yep, of Genesis, chapter 24 of Parshas, and the first 9 verses, which constitute, I believe, the second half of the second reading of this week's Torah portion. I am going to open up my Chumash here.
Which chapter is that?
So this is 24.
Starts with no Abraham.
Verse 1. Okay, 24 verse 1. What page is it on? Who's got the page? That'll be easier. 109? Yeah. All right, 109. All right, I'm going to try to do something here that should make things a little bit easier for everybody. Parsha. Okay. I'm going to go to the Torah reading. Pull this up, second reading. And I'm going to read this. All right, I'll do the reading of the Chumash, and then we're going to jump into the Rashi and do the analysis. Oh, as far as structure, same structure every week. right? Some verses, a Rashi. We break down Rashi, ask a bunch of questions, put it back together again, and walk away with a life lesson. All right, here we go. The translation I'm reading is from the Chumash in front of us, so it's going to be a little different than online, but so it goes. You guys will get online similar concept, but maybe a little different language. All right, now, Abraham, Avram was old, well on in years, says the Torah, verse 1, chapter 24, and Hashem had blessed Abraham, Avram with everything. And Rashi says, what does it mean with everything? Bakol is the gematria, numerology. Oh, who took the numerology course with me? A few months ago? No one here? Okay. The gematria, the numerology of Bakol is Ben. Oh, mom, good. So Ben means son. God had blessed Abraham, Avram with everything, means with a son, which leads into the next verse. And Abraham said to his servant, the elder of his household, who controlled 111, all that was his, place now your hand under my thigh. Verse number 3, and I will have you swear by Hashem, God of heaven and God of earth, that you not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell. Rather, verse 4, to my land and to my kindred shall you go and take a wife for my son, for Isaac. So here we go. Abraham tells his trusted servant, Eliezer, we need to find a wife for my son, but not from the locals. Go back to my birthplace, go back to my land where I came from, the land of Haran, and he doesn't specify if it's the land of Haran, and from there find a girl for my daughter. Verse number, for my son, for my son. Yeah.
Aram.
Aram originally, and then Haran, it's different names, different towns, different locales. It's like Atlanta, Georgia. It's all the same region. Verse number 5, the servant said to him, here's, whenever you're negotiating, there's a little pushback. Here's the pushback. Perhaps the woman shall not wish to follow me to this land. Shall I take your son back to the land from which you departed? Let's say we find the perfect girl, but she doesn't want to move. Let's just say she wants to live at home. So what do we do? Do we bring Isaac, Yitzchak there? Verse number 6, Abraham answered him, beware not to return my son to there. Verse number 7, Hashem, God of heaven, who took me from the house of my father and from the land of my birth, who spoke concerning me and who swore to me, saying, to your offspring will I give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. In other words, the same God that promised me all these things and that blessed me with all these things, the same God that's hooked me up for so long with so many blessings, that God will make sure that you're successful in this mission. Verse number 8, on a technicality, however, but if the woman will not wish to follow you, you shall then be absolved of this oath of mine. However, do not return my son to there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him regarding this matter. And that is how the second reading comes to a conclusion. Make sense? Mm-hmm. The narrative makes sense. You guys sure? Ha ha! Trick question as always. Does the narrative make sense? Okay, if you had to summarize that, I'm going to do the summary. All of this is background, but we need the background. We can't jump into the foreground without the background. So here we go. The background is Abraham says to himself, it's time for my son to get married. He says to his servant, you're going to be the one to get the girl, to find the right wife for my son, and I'll send you on a mission back to my old stomping grounds. The fellow says, Eliezer says, that's his name, Eliezer. He says, yeah, but what if she doesn't want to move? Is your son gonna move? Like who's open to what? He says, look, God Almighty has hooked us up. You'll be successful. And if not, if she really doesn't want to move, either way, my son is not moving. He's not leaving these here parts. That is not going to happen. And that is how this conversation ends. And the servant swears that indeed he will do his best to facilitate this mission. Okay, makes sense? Yeah? We're going to figure it out. All right. There is an anomaly. When I say anomaly, what I mean is there is a difference in the text between verses. I was going to ask, did you notice anything? But I think there's too many verses to notice to play investigator. So I want to contrast verse number 3 and verse number 7. Okay, verse number 3 and verse number 7. But the truth is, you don't need the Chumash. You can use the Torah Studies booklets that are in front of you if you want. We have the ones that, hold on, let's get you hooked up with that over here. Okay, so here we go. If you don't mind, Jose, please read. I know I just read it, but I want you to read it, and then I want you guys to see if you notice it. But hold on one second. Let's do this. Let me share this, and we are good to go. Okay, read, if you will, verse number 3. This is where Abraham is making his servant promise.
So, which text?
Text number 3. Text 1a, verse number 3, just the first verse.
The one I will have you.
Yeah.
I will have you swear by God, the God of heaven and earth, that you will not take a woman for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell.
Okay, and verse number 7, which is text 1b.
God, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home and the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and promised to give this land to my children, will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there.
Does anybody notice a thing? Did anybody notice the difference between 1a and 1b? Between verses 3 and 7. 3 is the first verse in 1a, and 7 is verse 1b.
In 1b, in 1a, they refer to God as the God of heaven and earth, and in 1b, they simply say the God of heaven and God.
Excellent. If you notice in verse 3, Abraham refers to God, right? He says, "I want you to swear by God," and then he explains who's God, the God of heaven and earth. Elokei hashamayim ve'elokei haaretz. In fact, if you were to translate that literally, it would be the God of heaven and the God of earth. So heaven and earth are specified in verse number 3. If you take a look at verse number 7, Abraham, the same Abraham, refers to God as the God of heaven. What's missing? Earth. What happened? 4 verses ago, he was the God of heaven and earth. Now he's the God of heaven. What happens? The good news is Rashi, our trusted commentator, our trusted leader of the text, Rashi immediately jumps in and explains. Take a look at text number 2. Take a look at text number 2. Jake, please read text 2, which is Rashi on verse number 7. Remember, Rashi's not going to comment on the first instance because we don't know anything's awry. It's only when you have the second instance, now we have an anomaly, now we have a discrepancy. First, he refers to God as God of heaven and earth. And then he says, God of heaven, what's going on? Rashi jumps in.
God, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home. But Abraham did not add the words, and the God of earth. Whereas earlier in verse 3, he said, I will have you swear, etc.
And in that verse, I will have you swear, he refers to God as the God of heaven and of earth. And so that's the question.
Abraham told Eliezer, today he is God of heaven and earth, because I made him familiar to the people's lexicon. However, when he took me from my father's home, he was only the God of heaven, not of earth, because humanity had yet to recognize him, and his name was not popular on earth.
Oh, you see that? How does Rashi answer the question? In verse number 3, Abraham in the present moment is having Eliezer promise, and he says, promise before God, the God of heaven and earth. Then in verse 7, which is later in the narrative, a few verses later, he says, the God of heaven who took me out of my birthplace. Why does he refer to God as only the God of heaven? What's Rashi's answer? Help me out here. Because today, God is...
It was not known.
Back then, when God took, in verse 7, when God, as he's doing some retrospection, when God took me out of my father's home, i.e., years ago, when he said, Lech Lecha, go. Lech Lecha was when Abraham was 75. Let's do some math here. Abraham was 75 when God says to him, Lech Lecha, leave. 75. Abraham gave birth to a son when he was 99. How many years is that?
Well, it's 27. It's 37 years later.
1 second. And then plus 37 after 99. So let's do the math again. 75 to 99 is how many years? 24. Plus 37? 51? 61? 61 years. Abraham is saying, 61 years ago, when the God of heaven told me to leave my God of heaven. What about the God of earth? Rashi says, back then, 61 years ago, he was only the God of heaven. It's like, I remember my grandfather used to say the story. He was a shaychet. He was a ritual slaughterer. And he worked in Denver. Mom, you know this story. You knew the story before I did, right? Sometimes he used to fly to Denver, the shecht. It was a schlachthaus. It was a slaughterhouse, kosher slaughterhouse. And he told me the story. He said he once visited Coors. He had some downtime. He went to Coors and he did some tasting in the part of the beer crawl or the beer tour. You take a tour of the factory. And he told them, you guys have such good beer. You should go national. How come I can't get it in Pittsburgh? And they listened to him and they went national. At least he took the credit always in telling the story that he's the one that told the Coors people to go national and not just be a local thing, which is essentially the same thing we're saying here. What are we saying here? That back then, 61 years ago, God was local. Local in heaven. In heaven, they knew about him, but no one knew him here. He was a local brewery. In heaven, the angels knew about God. On earth, no one had any clue. 61 years later, after Avram, lech lecha, I'm using that as a verb, after Avram did his thing, right? At this point, God is the God of heaven and the God of earth. Make sense? It's a beautiful Rashi.
Yes and no.
What could go wrong? Yes.
When he was already the God of earth 61 years before.
Technically. He was the God of earth because he's the God of everything. But did people know him?
Yeah,
Did
so
they?
we can go that way.
That's what Rashi says. They didn't know him. Of course, God is, yes, you're 100% true. God is definitely the God of everything. Nothing outside of God's purview. However, God wasn't known. He wasn't famous. So Abraham made him famous. Now he's the God of heaven and earth. So when Abraham, in the present moment, 61 years later, about to send Eliezer to find a wife for his son, he says, swear by the God of heaven and earth. And then he says later in the narrative, by the way, when God of heaven sent me, lech lecha, when he sent me away, God of heaven, because at that point, Abraham hadn't really begun his work in publicizing the name of God. Again, that's a beautiful insight. Makes a lot of sense. But it fails everything we know about Rashi.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a big question.
Ready.
Why does he have to point it out?
Good. That's one question. Why is Abraham, good, I wasn't going to start with that, but that's a good one to start with. Why is Abraham, in his conversation with Eliezer, making this, in Hebrew we would say this diuk, this distinction, this fine point? Back in the day, he was only the God of heaven, and now he's the God of heaven and earth because of what I've done. Is he patting himself on the back? Is he just so used to saying God of heaven and earth, and then he has to correct himself when he's speaking in retrospect? But then God was also the God of heaven. What is of earth? Sorry. So what is actually? Why does it need to be stated in conversation? That's one question. Good.
I was going to say it is kind of funny that you point out it's been 61 years, and so Abraham's obviously older, and it seems like he's almost like waxing poetic and having a flashback, like in the middle.
Little nostalgia, middle of a conversation. It's a little weird. I mean, and again, it could be, but it seems like there's something else at play. The first question I was going to start with is the question that we always love starting with, which is looking at the header of Rashi. Because one of the rules of Rashi, as the Rebbe kind of clarified, is that Rashi's header, the words that he quotes from the verse, are super precise. If Rashi was explaining the anomaly and the discrepancy of why does Abraham refer to God only as the God of heaven in verse 7 as opposed to heaven and earth in verse 3, which word should he quote as the header of verse number 7? You know which ones? Look in the text. I'm going to share it here as well. Let's look back at Rashi. Look at Rashi text 2. Again, we're just focusing on text 2, focusing on Rashi. Look at the header. The header would be in the Hebrew, the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words in the quotation marks. In the English, it's the first line of the English. You would expect on text 2, Rashi to quote which words? Elokei Hashamayim, God of heaven. He should quote those two words, God of heaven, and he should say, God of heaven. What about God of earth? Why does he quote Shem, Elokei Hashamayim, Asher Lekachani Besavi, God, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home? So many extra words. So many extra words. All you're explaining is why here it says God of heaven and not God of heaven and earth. Quote God of heaven and deal with the question and answer the question. Do you understand the question number one? Mm-hmm. Question number one is, if Rashi is explaining the discrepancy that in verse 3, Abraham says, Elokei Hashamayim v'Elokei ha'aretz, the God of heaven and the God of earth, and here he only says the God of heaven, then why not Rashi should just quote the words God of heaven and then explain why the earth, God of earth is not mentioned here. So that's question number one. Okay? Question number one is in the header. There's too many words. Rashi quotes too many words to just be dealing with that simple discrepancy that we've been thinking of. Question number two. What happens as Rashi leans into his commentary? Rashi says, but Abraham did not add the words and the God of earth. It's a weird way to start Rashi. Abraham did not add the words and the God of earth. Okay. Why doesn't Rashi say, I have a better idea. Rashi should quote the words, God of heaven, and say, whereas before he also added God of earth, that's because, and then explain. Why does Rashi say, but Abraham did not add the words and the God of earth? Why does he say it?
That was not a holy place where he was coming from, but where he is now, it's the God of heaven and the God of earth, because that is a holy land.
No, I'm with you. Yes, correct. You are correct. You are correct. But again, as Rashi begins his commentary, it seems to be that there could have been an easier way to say it, right? Could have just quoted the words, God, the God of heaven. And Rashi could have just said, again, I'm rewriting Rashi. Rashi was very precise and concise. Rashi could have started off with the English words, God, or with the Hebrew, but the translation, God, the God of heaven. And he could have launched in and said, whereas earlier he said God of heaven and God of earth, that's because, and then continue in the with the rest of Rashi's narrative. Why does he say, but Abram did not add the words in the God of earth, whereas earlier in verse 3 he said, I will have you swear. Rashi seems to go on a bit of a loop over there. That's question number two. By the way, if these questions aren't really hitting you in the question spots, don't worry. We have enough questions to put this together again that we're gonna have an incredible new picture of what Rashi is saying. Third question is, as Rashi continues, the third English line of Rashi, when Rashi contrasts verse 7 with verse 3, Rashi says, whereas earlier in verse 3 he said, I will have you swear. That's the contrast? Is that the contrast? With verse 3 he said, I will have you swear. I'm pretty sure the contrast with verse 3 is that verse 3 says, God of heaven and God of earth, not I will have you swear. Now the etc. includes the rest of it. But why would Rashi quote the wrong part of the verse and then in etc., V'gomer, instead of quoting the actual words that create the discrepancy between this verse and the last verse? Again, if Rashi is only out to explain why in this quote he refers to God as the God of heaven, whereas earlier, God of heaven and earth, he should have said simply, God of heaven. Earlier he called him God of heaven and earth. The reason is because of this. Rashi doesn't say that. Abraham did not have the words God of earth. Whereas earlier in verse 3, he said, I will have you swear. I will have you swear. It means nothing in our context. I will have you swear has nothing to do with heaven or earth. I will have you swear is the beginning of the verse. Why would Rashi go back to the beginning of that verse, verse 3, and not quote the relevant words from that verse? It's, again, seems a little weird. Rashi doesn't write things in a weird way. Rashi writes things in a precise way. Every word of Rashi, every word choice, the order of the flow of Rashi is precise. The header is precise. There's nothing out of place. It's a perfectly decorated room. There's no lamp that's a millimeter off. If Rashi quotes a whole line of the current verse when he's out to explain only why he refers to him as God of heaven, that's weird. If Rashi starts, but Abraham did not have the words in the God of earth, that's also weird. If Rashi quotes verse 3, but he quotes the wrong part of the verse that has nothing to do with our contrast, that's also weird. And then Rashi continues in the next paragraph. Abraham told Eliezer, today he's God of heaven and earth, but before he was only God of heaven. Abraham told this to Eliezer? Eliezer had to know this? Are you kidding me? You want to tell me that in his own language, he referred to God as God of heaven or God of earth or whatever, however he referred to God and whatever his honorific, that's one thing. But this is what Abraham's telling Eliezer? Like he's making a point. And if yes, why? Why does Eliezer have to know that before he was God of heaven? Today he's God of heaven and earth. How is that relevant to the conversation about a wife for Yitzchak? Are you with me on this question? And how does Rashi know that Abraham told Eliezer this? Now, I know that Abraham said this, but how do you know it was told to Eliezer? And I know he was speaking to Eliezer, but how do you know this was an intentional message for Eliezer? Maybe he was just speaking to Eliezer about the mission, and as he's speaking about God, he also throws out an honorific about God, how he thinks of God. How do we know that this is a message, a specific message that he's telling Eliezer? That doesn't make sense.
Rabbi?
Hold on one second, Richard. Yeah, go.
Does it have to do with him sending the message to Eliezer about the place where he's sending him to?
Yes, that's going to be the answer. Now, we have to understand what that means. And to do that, I'm going to ask another question that's way more basic to the story, because we know that when we're kind of lost and we think Rashi is addressing one question, but it doesn't make sense that he's addressing that question because he could have addressed it in a different way, and he's saying things that are extraneous and quoting different parts of the verse. It seems very odd the way Rashi is addressing what we think is the question. That's always a clue that Rashi is actually addressing a different question altogether, and he's addressing what you're touching on, and you're exactly in the right direction. We're going to hone in on where you're going with that. Richard, you wanted to say something?
I'm not sure if this is even close. So I will have you swear. When he left originally from his home, you couldn't swear because there was no God to swear to. Now
Interesting.
you can swear to God because
Okay.
God is recognized. So your oath is valid now.
I like that.
Swearing is valid now because
I hear that. We're going to go in a different direction, but I like your train of thought. I also like the fact that we're all now thinking along the terms of there's something else at play here. There's another dynamic here. Rashi is not simply addressing, look, we could have said, and this is how I'm telling you, Rashi wrote his commentary in what, 800, 900 years ago? The 1100s, whatever it was, 1000s, 1100s? 800 for 800 or 900 years, everyone's been studying Rashi. And I'm telling you, everyone has studied this Rashi the same way. Rashi is addressing the discrepancy. Earlier, he calls him God of heaven and earth. And here he calls him God of heaven. Why? Because earlier in history, he was only God of heaven. And now he's God of heaven and earth. And that ties up all the loose ends. And the Rebbe says, loose ends are tied. Let me throw you some loose ends. The Rebbe spoke about this in 1971. And this week in 1971. It sounds like this week in whatever. That's how many years ago? 53 years ago. When the Rebbe cited this Rashi, he asked literally 10 questions on Rashi. 10. I asked 4 tonight because I have Rahmanas on everybody, because the questions are so specific and precise. It's too much. So I pared it down to 4 questions, Passover style, right? The top 4 questions. Question number 1, what's with the header of Rashi? If Rashi is only explaining why God of heaven and not God of earth, quote those 2 words and jump in. Why does Rashi start it? And earlier he said, he doesn't say God of heaven, God of earth, because, and just launch into it. Why does he quote from verse 3, the wrong part of the verse? Why does he say that Abram was telling this to Eliezer? Why did Eliezer need to know about this whole dynamic of earlier this and now that? And again, I alluded to this before, but the Rebbe says because we've been learning Rashi wrong the whole time. Vlad, jump in.
Oh, I just was wondering why does he make him swear at all? Does he usually lie or not do the things that Abraham asked him?
Good. I don't think that that's a question that's specifically to this, but it's a good question. I think the promise in the oath is, when things get a little tough, you'll be bound by your oath. In other words, if you can't find her and you want to give up, you'll have a little extra motivation to do that. So I think Rashi's assuming that the Ben Chamish Mikra, or the basic reading of the text, the straightforward reading of the student, you'll be like, okay, I understand. I know for myself sometimes, if you make a promise, you're more committed. That I get. But there's another fundamental question, and this is now we're moving away from the question stage and into the resolution stage of Rashi or of the concept, and then we're going to put Rashi back together again. All right, all the king's horses and all the king's men will put Rashi back together again. So here we go. There was a much bigger question that Rashi knew the student will have. And you and I should have had this question. And I'm going to allow you guys to come up with the question on the story itself. What does Abraham tell Eliezer to do? Go to go to the mission, right? Take an oath, but do what? Go to Haran, find the wife, and then bring her back. And Eliezer says, what's his pushback? What if?
What if she doesn't want to come?
What does Abraham say?
No way.
Then don't, then, but we're
It's all-
not going there, so.
What's the question?
Shall I bring her back?
Why he cannot go there?
Rashi, sorry. Yeah, say it louder.
Why he cannot go there?
Why not? Why not? Why can't Isaac, Yitzchak go to the girl? Again.
Because it's
I have a-
only,
So was one second. Again.
Because
Abraham, one second, hold on. Abraham says to Eliezer, go back to my home, find the girl, bring her here. It says, okay, I got it. But wait, what if she wants to stay there? Can I bring him there? Avram says, no. What's the obvious question? Why? Why not? Let me build the question. Let me explain why it's a question. And to explain why, we need to look at a kliyaka. That is a contemporary of Rashi. He came actually a little bit later than Rashi, but even though he's not Rashi in this case, or any case, he's not Rashi, he's a different guy, but he's going to add some flavor to this and understanding. And as an introduction to the kliyaka, I need to share something that everyone knows, which is the influence, the famous question of nature versus nurture, right? The famous question. Are we a product of our genetics, or are we a product of our environment? What's the answer? Yes. Which one? Both. Nature versus nurture. The answer is nature and nurture. I'll take a double. I'll take two to go. Nature has an influence. Nurture has an influence. Let's read a beautiful angle on this. By the way, in case you're wondering where we're going with this, don't worry. We're not going too far off before we come right back to the question. This right now is going to help build the question that the acute student, is that right? That the good student will have on this narrative. It doesn't make sense. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the kliyaka. David, please read this one. It is text number 3. Take it away.
the genetic nature of parents is passed down to their children. This only concerns negative habits such as overeating, lust, greed, envy, etc., that derive from our corporeal nature. Such traits are passed down to the next generation who emulate their forebears. Idol worship is different. This is the product of education, not genetic disposition. Therefore, Abraham was wary of the Canaanites, who were lustful and succumbed to sins of passion, though they refrained from idol worship. Yet he welcomed his relatives whose only fault was idol worship.
You hear what? Thank you. You hear what the Kliyaka is saying? Nature versus nurture. And he says, now, you're going to ask scientifically, biologically, how do you know? I don't know. This is what he says. There are certain things that are nature. Forget nurture for a second. Nature. Overeating. Why is my highlighting not working? Overeating, lust, greed, envy, anything that is part of our corporeal nature. In other words, the physical, as they say in Yiddish, the grubkeit, how do you translate grubkeit? It's the animalistic part of the nature. He says that is nature, not nurture. That is nature. A parent passed down to a child. It's just a certain inherent disposition. Idol worship, he says, though, idol worship is different. Idol worship is not nature. It is nurture. What's everyone doing? Who do they worship? It's follow the leader when it comes to idol worship. Idol worship is not like, oh, I must serve that idol. It's like, I don't know. What do you worship? Where do you go to for services? I guess I'll go with you. We're social creatures. Idol worship is not like a lust, it's like a passion. Certain people have a disposition. They're very passionate. And you know what? Passionate people might have passionate kids. And it's possible not, but he says that is genetic. As far as who you worship, that's all nurture. That's learned. So let's pause here for a moment. He says like this. You ready? He's going to contrast, the Kliyaka contrast now. I know we read it, but we're breaking it down. The Kliyaka contrasts the difference between Canaan, Israel, and Haran, and the new town versus the old town. He's like this. The people in Canaan, the Canaanites, they are lustful by nature. You know, it's nature. The nature is, it's a rough nature. It's very, very hedonistic. Who do they worship? I've been making inroads with them. We've been teaching monotheism. So they're learning a new way of worship. But their nature, it's a rough nature. Whereas at home, back in Haran, the nature, good people. Good people. But they haven't learned who to worship yet. You see the difference?
Mhm.
You with me on the difference? This is not the Kli Yakar. This is not me. The Kli Yakar just said that. Look back inside. The Kli Yakar says it. Right? Let's put one more time. The second paragraph. Therefore, Abraham was wary of the Canaanites. That's where they currently live, who were lustful and succumbed to sins of passion. That's nature. That's a nature problem. Though they refrained from idol worship because nurture, he had been teaching them about monotheism. Not all of them refrained from idol worship, but like some of them knew. Yet he welcomed his relatives back home, whose only fault was idol worship. In other words, they had a better nature, but the nurture wasn't there. Are you guys with me?
Mhm.
So now let's figure this out. Let's put the pieces together ourselves. Abraham's looking for a wife for his son. He has two choices. Let's keep it very binary. He has two choices. Behind door number one is a local Canaanite girl where he lives currently. A local Canaanite girl. She might have heard about monotheism. Maybe she's not serving idols. But man, those genetics, oof, a little bit tough. A little bit hedonistic. That's behind door number one. Door number two, the girls from back home. Back home, good people, good nature, good heart, kind and generous, compassionate, good people. But they don't know about monotheism. Who does he choose?
The ones he can educate.
Door number two. Door number two. A good person. Pirkei Avot. A rabbi asks his students, what's the best trait a person can have? This one, someone who sees what's going to be. And one says, Leiv Tov, a good heart. The rabbi says, I like that one. If you have a good heart, you got everything.
Rabbi,
Abraham said, we need it. 1 second, Richard. Let me. I want to close
Go.
this because otherwise it's going to leak out. So here we go. Abraham says, I want a girl for my son. I want a wife for my son who's a good person, nature, a good nature, a good heart, a leiv tov, a sweetheart. Yeah, the local girls might know about monotheism, but I don't know. The nature is not great. The nurture is there, but the nature is not great. Let's go for the girl that has the good nature, and the nurture we can worry about. You with me on this?
Mhm.
So now Eliezer asked the question. Okay, what happens? Okay, I understand. We'll get a girl from there. Great. And we'll bring her back here. But what happens, says Eliezer, if she doesn't want to move? Should Isaac go there?
Because it's the wrong place to be nurtured.
Comes along Abraham and he says no. But the question still remains, the hanging in the air. It's like a cloud after rain and it's still dense. There's still a fog. The question remains, why not? What's the problem? They're good people. You asked me to get a girl from there. They're obviously good people. They're your family. They're mishpacha. You know them. They have a good nature. They have a leiv tov. They have a good heart. They're not lustful, hedonistic, and unless right, they don't have the grubkite. They don't have the corporeal reality. Great. So can Isaac move there? You okay with that? There's good people. Can he move there? No. Why not?
Not a good environment.
This is what Rashi's answering. Understand this. This question is what the Rashi that we studied together, we spent like 10, 15 minutes on. That's the question Rashi. Rashi is not answering a discrepancy, God of heaven and earth. It's not what Rashi is addressing. Oh, in the context of this question, that will be answered. But that's not what Rashi is aiming to answer. And the reason is because look at his header. Just look at the title of the Rashi. Rashi is not simply addressing a discrepancy. He would have quoted two words and he would have been in and out. Rashi goes on this whole roundabout loop because he's answering a different question altogether, which is what the question that should be bothering anyone who reads the story, which is, I hear what you're saying, Abraham, but why? You haven't given us a reason. And Rashi says, oh, but he did. Now, we read earlier, the way we understood Rashi is that now, after 61 years of my work, people know about God on earth. That's not what Rashi's saying. Rashi is saying that Abraham is telling Eliezer, 61 years later, people here know about God. But people back home, they still don't. You know why? Because when God pulled me out of that place, he was only known as the God of heaven. And I haven't been there to change the dynamic, to change the facts, to educate the people on the ground. Which means that that place back home, they're good people. But for the last 61 years, I haven't been there. And social media hasn't been created. And YouTube doesn't exist. And I haven't been able to spread. I couldn't take out an ad in the Haran Times because apparently they don't like outside influences and outside advertisements. And no one has taught, no one has been spreading, no one has been educating the people vis-a-vis monotheism, vis-a-vis Hashem.
Well, why is it he didn't think Isaac could be a positive influence on them?
Oh, hold on. Good, hold on. Good, hold on. Abraham says, the efforts that we've made were only done here. Therefore, we need to marry, all puns intended, the inside, the best nature with the best nurture. What is that? A girl from there living here, then good pairing the good nature with the good place of nurture. You with me on that? And now your question is, one second. Well, why can't Isaac go back there? And why can't Isaac educate the people? Number one, good question. Number one, he still can't make up those 61 years. That's going to be started from scratch. What's going to be with the family? What's going to be with the kids? God had blessed Abraham with a specific blessing to be successful. God had told Abraham that the monotheistic spreading of the message should be specifically in the land that I will show you. God had blessed the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, as the place, as the seat of monotheism. God had not necessarily granted the blessing that it should be successful even in Haran. In other words, even if Isaac went there and tried, who says he would have been successful? Now we know why Rashi quotes the full verse, not the full verse, but all those words. Let's go back and see. Let's go back and look at Rashi. This is going back to text number 2, which is the Rashi. So comes along Rashi and he quotes a whole spiel. God, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's home. And with these words, Rashi is saying, let's look at all these words from the verse. God is the God of heaven who took me from my father's home. By the time I left home, he was still only the God of heaven. And he sent me from there and he sent me to a land to make a difference within monotheism, to make things, to advance things. But that was not home. That was here in Canaan. That was not home in Haran. And Rashi's, the other clue is why would Abraham be telling Eliezer all of these details? God of heaven and earth. None of it is relevant. The relevance should be if he's just giving him, telling him what to do with the vis-a-vis finding a wife. He should have just said, God has swear to God, as it were, that you'll go there and find the wife. And when he says, well, what happens if she doesn't want to go? He should say, the same God that promised me success in my journey will also give you success in your journey. Why does he go, God of heaven and earth? Why does he do all that? Again, to indicate that we're dealing with another objection and another question. It is, why not? He's answering the why not question. That's why he quotes in the verse, when he quotes verse 3, he says, whereas earlier in verse 3 he said, I will have you swear, because in the context of an oath is not a time for flowery honorifics. Why are you saying the God of heaven, the God of earth? You're making an oath. It's a legal declaration. Why are you going with adjectives now? Why are you giving God a last name? God, the God of heaven, the God of earth, in verse 3, even the first verse that we had. Why give God any honorifics? Just say simply, God, swear to God that you'll do this mission. I swear to God, the God of this, the God of that. Why are you doing any honorifics? Says Rashi, all that is a clue that this is not just an honorific, it's part of the oath, it's part of the narrative, it's part of the thing. And that's why the very next words in Rashi is Abraham told Eliezer. This is the message to Eliezer. He's not just speaking in a flowery way. He's not just espousing honorifics about God. He's telling Eliezer, he's answering Eliezer. And if you read the words, today he is a God of heaven and earth, we're here because I made him familiar in the people's lexicon. We're here. However, when he took me from my father's home back home, he was only the God of heaven, not of earth, because humanity there, and yet to recognize him, and his name was not popular on earth, but not on earth in that space. Ba'aretz could mean in the land of my youth. This is how Abraham answers Eliezer, and the question not of just what to do, but why not? Why not bring Isaac there? If the girl, if you want the girl from there, well, why can't your son live there as well? And now we have the answer, because you need the combo of the nature and the nurture. The nature here is no good. You got to go back home to get a girl of good nature. But the nurture there is no good. Why? Abraham tells Eliezer why. Because 61 years ago, before I had started all this monotheistic movement, 61 years ago, I moved. And so no one's been spreading the good word. So everyone's serving idols. Everyone's pagan over there. They're all idol worshipers. You move my son there, he's going to be steeped in idolatry. What's going to happen? Oh, so they don't teach monotheism. That was a good question. But it doesn't have God's blessing. God said, do it over here. How do we know it's going to be successful over there? How do we even know it's going to have the right influence? You can't send him there. So you have to get the girl with the good nature from there and put them both, put the couple here, so they'll have the good nature with the good nurture, and that will be a successful match. And this is, sorry?
Go on.
No.
Is that not diametrically opposed to the whole approach Chabad is taking?
Yeah, good. I'm going to repeat your question. So Dave is asking, well, 1 second, what about Chabad? Chabad goes to Timbuktu to spread Judaism. Good. This is, the Rebbe addresses this in the Sikha. The Rebbe says, this is all pre-Sinai, pre-Matan Torah. Before the Torah was given, you could only have an influence where God said it was a very limited scope of influence. After Sinai, what is Sinai? According to Kabbalah, Chassidus, etc., it's a time when the boundaries between heaven and earth were blurred or were merged. It's when God came down to earth and Moses went up to heaven. It's a time when the boundaries merge, and thus it becomes for all of earth possible to raise it to heaven. So now the mission comes to make a difference in Haran, to go everywhere and spread the light, because the light can now be spread everywhere. Until Sinai, it was very limited to where God said to go. God said to go to Canaan, not Haran. Haran doesn't have that blessing. But post-Sinai, it's the mission now to be a light into the nations, and now the light is meant to spread. So that's the difference between pre-Sinai and post-Sinai. Abraham, obviously, and Isaac and Jacob, the patriarchs lived before Sinai. Let's do a few texts inside where we see the Rebbe developing this concept. I'm going to read this. I'll just do a few, and then I want to end with I think a beautiful takeaway. Text 4. Look at text 4. Yeah, it's on page 61. Abraham adjusted his language. Earlier he said God of heaven and earth, and now just God of heaven. This discrepancy holds the answer to Eliezer's question of why not move Isaac to where the girl lives. Text 5a. The Rebbe continues, because it is a superficial change. Superficial change here. I haven't changed the nature of the Canaanites. I only made God familiar in the people's lexicon. They changed their manner of speech. This did not change their habits and behavior. Because Eliezer might ask, 1 second, if they should live here, then what's wrong with the girls here? You can't have it both ways. If they can live there, that means here is better. Great. So then why not get a girl from here? And if you want to get a girl from there, well, why can't they move there? So that's where the nature versus nurture duality comes in play. There's good nature, here's good nurture. Let's marry the two together. Again, pun intended. 5b, when Abraham called out there in the name of God, the God of the world, God became the God of the earth, or at least part of the lexicon on earth. However, this only began in Israel, Canaan, after God took Abraham from his father's home. Before that time, God's name was not familiar on earth. It follows that in his father's home, i.e. Haran, God remained as he had always been, God of heaven, but not of earth. In that region, they did not recognize God, and his name was uncommon among them, and that's why Abraham does not want his son to move there. All right, and that concludes essentially the insight. So I want to just very quickly, like maybe a 60-second review, what we thought Rashi was saying and what we now know Rashi is saying, and it answers again 10 plus questions, which we didn't flesh out, but it's there. It's in the original talk. It's amazing. But here we go. What we thought was that Rashi was simply addressing a discrepancy and telling us some interesting information. Abraham made headway, or whatever the word is, over the last 61 years. Back in the day, no one knew of him, and now people know of him. And maybe he was FYIing Eliezer. Eliezer, you know who I am? I've made a difference in the world. Yeah, that's it. A little simplistic. And Rashi doesn't seem to be saying that because he goes on into different directions in his text. According to the Rebbe, the way the Rebbe understands Rashi, putting the pieces back together again, Rashi is addressing something completely different. Rashi is answering the biggest question of the story, which is why not move Eliezer? Why can't Isaac move there? What's wrong?
Well,
If
that's
the-
answered that part, not
Yeah.
about the nature nurture. Text 1b took me from my father's home, the land of my birth, and spoke to me and promised to give this land to my children.
Oh,
So that's
good.
it.
Toba's pointing out that you can answer that question in a different way.
Yeah.
Why can't Eliezer move to back
Because
to the
God
home?
promised
Because the future of this family is meant
lay
to
in
be
Canaan.
in Canaan. God says, I'm going to give you land, and that's where you're going to build your family. Good.
Yeah.
Good. I was thinking the same thing.
Okay.
And I don't
To have to live anywhere other than in Canaan.
say it again.
Because of the Akedah.
Yeah, also okay,
How could
but
you
that's a
do
midrashic. No, you're right. That's a midrashic. Once he was brought as an offering, so he can't move. But that's not a shot. That's not a simple. That's not a narrative thing. You had to learn a medrash to learn that Isaac became the status of a sacrifice, and a sacrifice once it's brought, it can't leave the city, or Israel. You're not right. You're right, but that's already a.
But we know about the Akedah. That is in Torah.
Correct, but we don't know.
So I don't need a medrash
five-year-old.
so that I can read those words.
No. But the 5-year-old, the Ben Chamash Mikra, hasn't studied yet Mishnayos, hasn't studied yet the laws of the Mishnah that tell us that when you bring a sacrifice and it doesn't go through, then you can never take the animal out to pasture. I.e., you can't take it outside the holy. You don't know that as a 5-year-old. So they get Ben Chamash Mikra Rashi addressing.
I didn't know that as an 85-year-old. I just thought it was because Isaac was whatever. And
Right.
it was the maternal side that seemed to have the nurture, because those men were no good.
The men, in general, that seems to be a thing. But in short, Toba, you're right. You're right. And it still seems like Abram was adding another angle to this.
Yeah.
During, you're also right. But he seems like he's adding another angle to this as well. In addition to the fact that God said that this is the place to now raise now where you all going to live. In addition to that, there's another problem.
Take a wife from there.
You got to take away from there, right? So, because that would raise another question. If here's the destiny or the future, right, then why not take a girl from here? Oh, so now I have to get into the nature nurture thing. So the nature here is no good. So you got to go back there. But the nurture there is no good. And Abraham is telling him why. Because I left 61 years ago before this campaign started. So they don't know of God. So what? You're going to move there? That's not a plan. Take the girl there, move her. I want to share with you my takeaways. Takeaway number one. Takeaway number one is something that I think, again, it's a twist from what we just saw. What if we look at somebody and we say, that person has a rough nature. They're a little bit of a tough customer. Is there any hope? Yes. What we learned today is that Abraham was able to at least teach them to become familiar with God. Even the Canaanites, even those that with a rough nature, he was still able to nurture them and educate them. And so message number one, takeaway number one is never write anyone off. You might not be able to transform their nature inside, but education, love, guidance, mentoring, we can make a lot of headway. I know Abraham still didn't want his kid to marry, fine. But the point is you could still make an impact even when you're dealing with a Canaanite, let alone, someone who's not a Canaanite. Certainly we should never, the point is, takeaway number one, never write off anyone else. Say, that person, we're not going to get through them. Even a guy like Lot, just to mix stories, right? When Abraham and Lot separated, I may have mentioned this last week. I don't remember if I did. Abraham said, we can't, this pasture's not big enough for the both of us. You go this way, I'll go that way, right? Years later, what happens? 2 angels show up at Lot's door. What does he do? He welcomes them in. Abraham might have thought he was not successful in educating his nephew. Guess what? When his nephew sees guests, what does he do? Come on in. The hospitality that Well, that I can't answer that one. That one I can't answer. I completely I agree with you on that one, and I can't explain why the daughter offer was on the table. But notwithstanding that,
Edit that part.
I don't know. I can't. Lo was a rough. Was it his nature? I know he was a rough guy, even though he came from the same. Whatever.
He wasn't perfect.
He wasn't perfect, but something got through. Abraham probably thought this guy. I can't get through to him. He probably wrote him up. He probably said, "I've had no influence on him." But you know what? Even though we should never give up hope. Sometimes we think, "Why am I planting a seed? It's not going to go through. It's not going to take root." Never despair. Plant the seed, water it, grow it. It's going to grow.
And even there's another lesson because they're also showing you don't have to get married to everybody that you make a difference.
Oh, correct.
You don't have to
Right. Don't marry everybody. Wait. I want to end with one other lesson. The lesson is on the opposite side. That's on the nature side. If the nature is a little rough, don't worry. You can still nurture them. You can still lift them up. But on the other side, if we have a good nature, says Avram, put yourself in a good environment. Don't put yourself in a challenging environment. Just because you're a good person doesn't mean you should make it harder for yourself. Make it easier for yourself. Go easy on yourself. Don't make things harder and more challenging. You're a good person, great. Go into a good environment. I want to end with this. The bottom line is that each of us is here to make a difference. And we do that with our own unique blend of herbs and spices. You know, like KFC, what's his name? Colonel Sanders, right? Herbs and spices. Each of us has our unique personality. Each of us has our unique education. The nature is unique. The nurture is unique, right? Birth is God saying, you matter and I need you on the team. If any one of us were redundant, if any one of us were the same, one of us wouldn't be here, right? Mark Twain said, be yourself, everyone else is taken. And so the message tonight is, whether your nature is this or that, whether your nurture is this or that, you have a role. Post-Sinai, for sure, you have a role on God's team. You have a role to make the world a better place, and each of us is meant to do that. And unlike Abraham, who tells Eliezer that Isaac can't move to the place that doesn't have the education, today we know post-Sinai. We'll end with this: post-Sinai, education can spread everywhere. The light can spread everywhere. There's no limit to the light. And we have the blessing that we'll be successful. And so indeed, we should never shy away from a challenge, but always look to spread the light in further and further places and to educate and make an impact on those around us. Never write off anybody based on their nature. They can always change. And never give ourselves more challenges than we need. Put ourselves in a context of success, and indeed we will be successful. And let us say, Amen. Amen. May Norm have a refuah shlema. May the Torah that we study and continue to study, the prayers that we say for him, may they indeed grant him a complete and speedy healing, and may all of us have all the blessings in our lives that we want to need. And the main thing is light and inspiration. And once again, we're doing it again. Let us say, Amen. Amen. Thank you for joining. We'll see you soon. Questions, comments?
Thank you.
Wow.
Pleasure.
Perhaps the mistake Lot made was moving into the
Yeah.
environment.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. Jake, where did Lot go? Avram said to Lot, listen, it's too close. There's too much trauma. You're right. Your father died when he followed me into the furnace. There's too much family trauma. Let's take a little break from each other. Where does Lot choose to go? Sodom. Talk about a good nature going into a bad environment. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. Why would you go into a negative environment? Right?
Because the good environment was taken.
As the good environment was there. Yeah, well, that's awesome. True. That is literally true. All right, good. Excellent. There was one other point that I was gonna say that I can't remember. Anyway, Farfallen, listen, it's already gone. But next thing. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it happens.
He's younger than we are.
Don't
All right.
call it 2 in the morning.
Sorry?
Don't call it 2 in the morning.
I won't.
That's
It'll
when I
hit
always
you.
remember what I forgot.
I know I'm with you. I know exactly what you're talking about. It'll come to me maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. I'll send a delayed email then to hit in the morning. All right, I'm kidding. All right, good to see everyone. By the way, we have a lot of cool stuff coming up. stay tuned. We have some events, some new classes that we're going to launch very soon. Very, very exciting stuff. Stay tuned and watch. Keep on refreshing your inbox. I'm kidding. You don't have to, but you'll see it. You'll see it when it hits. All right. Catherine,
you,
David,
Rabbi.
Jackie, Lisa, Betty, Scott, Mom, Deborah, Susan, Richard, Sam, Bert, Doreen, Kay, Amy, and Vlad. Good to see you guys. And of course, everyone here. Good to see you all. Have a wonderful week.